The gunshot shattered the dawn silence across High Ridge Ranch, and Mara Ellison's hands froze mid-reach for the flour sack. Through the cookhouse window she saw him, the quiet drifter who'd arrived 3 weeks ago, standing between an armed stranger and the ranch boy, his voice steady as stone. "You want me, Cole? Leave the kid alone." That's when everything she thought she knew crumbled. The drifter wasn't who he claimed, the ranch wasn't what it seemed, and the life she'd carefully rebuilt from ashes was about to explode into something far more dangerous than anything she'd left behind. Stay with me until the very end of this story, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The morning Mara Ellison first saw Evan Hale, frost still clung to the corners of the cookhouse windows, and her breath made small clouds in the pre-dawn darkness. She'd been awake since 4, as always, her hands already dusted with flour, the massive cast-iron stove radiating heat that never quite reached her bones. Outside, the Montana sky was that particular shade of purple-black that comes just before the world remembers color exists. 3 years. 3 years she'd been at High Ridge Ranch, and the routine had become her armor. Wake before the sun, fire up the stove, mix biscuit dough until her forearms burned, fry bacon until the cookhouse smelled like comfort instead of loneliness. Feed 30 hungry men who barely looked at her face, who cared only that the food was hot and plentiful, who treated her like part of the landscape, reliable, necessary, forgettable. She preferred it that way. The screen door creaked, that same third hinge that needed oil, that same sound that marked every dawn, and Mara didn't look up from the dough she was kneading. "Coffee's on the left. Biscuits will be ready in 20 minutes. You know the rules. No boots past the mat." "Yes, ma'am." The voice stopped her hands mid-motion, not because it was loud or particularly distinctive, but because of what it carried underneath the words. A careful control. Like someone who'd learned to make himself smaller than he actually was. She glanced up. He stood just inside the doorway, hat in his hands, already having removed his boots despite her not seeing him do it. Tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that might have been handsome if it wasn't so carefully neutral. His clothes were worn but clean, his coat patched at one elbow with stitching too precise to be his own work. He held himself with a stillness that reminded Mara of the ranch dogs when they sensed something wrong in the distance. "You're new," she said, returning to her kneading. "Chester hired you yesterday." "Yes, ma'am. Name's Evan Hale." "Mara Ellison. I run the cookhouse. You eat what I make when I make it. You've got problems with that, you talk to Chester, not me. You want seconds? You wait until everyone's had firsts. You got dietary restrictions or allergies? You tell me now before I accidentally kill you." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "No allergies. And I'll eat whatever you're willing to cook, ma'am. Not picky." "Good. Coffee's on the left. You mentioned that." He moved with that same controlled quiet, pouring himself a cup from the massive percolator she'd started an hour ago. He didn't gulp it down like most of the hands did, desperate for caffeine, before the day's work ground them down. Instead, he wrapped both hands around the mug and stood by the window, looking out at the emerging landscape. Mara studied him from the corner of her eye while she worked. Most new hires talked too much that first morning, nervous energy or trying to prove they belonged, or just lonely after days on the trail. But Evan Hale just stood there, drinking coffee, watching the day arrive like he was memorizing it. "Storm coming," he said after a long moment. Mara glanced toward the window. The sky was still clear, stars fading into pale blue. "Not according to the almanac." "Almanac's wrong." He took another sip. 3 days, maybe 4. Big one. Something in his certainty made her pause. "You a weather prophet?" "No, ma'am, just observant." The other hands started arriving then, boots thundering on the porch, voices loud with the particular energy of men about to do hard work and grateful for hot food first. The cookhouse filled with the familiar chaos, plates clattering, chairs scraping, the low rumble of conversation about the day's tasks. 30 men, give or take, depending on the season. Spring meant more hands for calving, summer meant fence repair and hay cutting, fall meant roundup and branding, winter meant only the core crew remained. Evan Hale took a seat at the far end of the long table, the spot usually left for newcomers or men too sick to engage in the social hierarchy that governed mealtimes. He ate methodically, without waste, and when Billy Cortez, a loud Texan who'd been at the ranch for 2 seasons, started his usual routine of testing new hires, Evan simply nodded at the appropriate moments and said nothing. "You worked ranches before?" Billy asked, his voice carrying that edge of challenge. "Some. Where at?" "Here and there." "That ain't an answer." Evan looked up then, and something in his gaze made Billy shut his mouth. Not threat, exactly. More like, wait. Like Evan Hale carried something heavy and had learned not to let it slop over onto other people. "I've worked cattle operations in Wyoming and Colorado," Evan said evenly. "Done fence work, branding, some bronc riding when I was younger and dumber. I know the back end of a horse from the front, and I can fix most things that break. That answer your question?" Billy grunted and went back to his biscuits. Mara served the food, refilled coffee mugs, and kept the biscuits coming until every man had eaten his fill. She moved through the cookhouse with practiced efficiency, seeing without looking, hearing without listening. She'd learned early on that ranch hands talked more freely when they thought she wasn't paying attention. She'd learned which men could be trusted, which ones watched her too long, which ones were kind in the small moments when kindness cost them nothing. She had not yet learned which category Evan Hale fit into. After breakfast, the hands filed out into the cold morning, Chester Holbrook's voice booming assignments. Chester was the foreman, a barrel-chested man in his 50s who ran High Ridge with firm fairness. He'd been the one to hire Mara 3 years ago, asking no questions about where she'd come from or why her hands shook when she signed the employment papers. She owed him for that silence. Evan was the last to leave. He brought his plate and mug to the washing station without being asked, something most of the hands never did, assuming that was part of her job. "Thank you for the meal, ma'am," he said. "Best biscuits I've had in a long time." "You don't have to butter me up. I'm not the one who decides if you stay or go." Wasn't buttering, was just truth. He paused at the door. "You need any repairs around here? I noticed that third hinge on the screen door is about to give out." Mara stopped scrubbing the cast-iron skillet. "You got time for that?" "I'll make time. Can't have a door falling off when you're carrying hot pots." Before she could respond, he was gone, boots back on, heading out into the morning with the other hands. She stood there for a moment, hands in soapy water, frowning. Most men didn't notice doors. Most men didn't notice much of anything beyond their own immediate needs. She'd counted on that invisibility, built her life around it. Evan Hale, she suspected, noticed everything. The days developed a rhythm. Evan worked wherever Chester sent him, fixing fence lines in the southern pastures, helping with the forge work, breaking ice on the water troughs, mucking stalls when other hands complained about the work. He never objected, never argued about assignments, and finished every task with the same methodical thoroughness. And every morning, he was the first one in the cookhouse after the coffee was ready. "Morning, Mara." He'd stopped calling her ma'am after the first week, after she'd told him, voice sharper than intended, that she wasn't old enough to be ma'amed by someone who was probably only 5 or 6 years younger than her own 32 years. "Morning, Evan." She'd stopped pretending she didn't time the coffee to be ready right when he arrived. "Biscuits in 10. He'd fixed the screen door hinge on his 3rd day. Then he'd noticed the wobbling leg on the prep table and fixed that too. Then the loose board on the porch steps. Small things, done in the margins of his day, never asking for acknowledgement. "You don't have to keep fixing things," she said one morning, watching him tighten the handle on the cookhouse's back door. "I know. So why do you?" He looked at her then, really looked in a way that made her want to step back and lean forward simultaneously. Place runs better when things work right. And you do enough without having to worry about whether a door handle's going to come off in your hand when you're carrying something heavy. That's practical. I'm a practical man. But he wasn't, not entirely. Practical men didn't stand at the window every morning watching the sunrise like it might be their last. Practical men didn't help with dishes without being asked. Practical men didn't carry that particular kind of careful stillness that spoke of violence learned and deliberately contained. Mara knew about that kind of stillness. She saw it in her own mirror on bad days. 2 weeks after Evan's arrival, Billy Cortez got drunk in town and came back looking for trouble. He stumbled into the cookhouse on a Saturday night when Mara was doing prep work for Sunday breakfast, and his eyes were mean with whiskey and something darker. "Hey there, Mara. You know what your problem is?" She kept chopping onions. "Go sleep it off, Billy. Your problem is you think you're better than us, walking around here like a ghost, like you're too good to talk to working men." "I'm not interested in this conversation. Go to bed." He moved closer, and she smelled the whiskey and tobacco, the particular stink of men who let anger ferment into something uglier. "Maybe you need someone to remind you that you're just the cook, nothing special, just another—" The door opened. Evan stood in the doorway, still dressed in his work clothes, dust and sweat still on him from whatever task had kept him late. He looked at Billy, then at Mara, and his face remained absolutely calm. "Billy, Chester wants to see you." "Bullshit, Chester's in town." "Then I guess I want to see you. Outside. Now." Billy laughed, but there was uncertainty in it. "You threatening me, Drifter?" "I'm asking you to leave, politely, once." Evan's voice never rose, never hardened. That somehow made it more absolute. "You don't get a second ask." Billy looked between them, whatever alcohol-fueled courage he'd had evaporating under Evan's steady gaze. He muttered something under his breath and stumbled back outside. The door closed. Mara realized her hands were shaking. She set down the knife. "You okay?" Evan asked. "I've handled worse than Billy Cortez." "I don't doubt it. That wasn't the question." She looked at him, this quiet man who'd been at the ranch for 2 weeks and had somehow appointed himself her guardian without asking permission. "Why did you come back to the cookhouse?" "Left my gloves, but lucky timing, I guess." "You don't wear gloves." He smiled then, real and brief, and it transformed his face into something younger, less guarded. "No, I don't." "So you were checking on me?" "Someone should." "I don't need a protector, Evan." "Didn't say you did. But everyone needs someone to notice when things aren't right." He retrieved the gloves he genuinely had left on the windowsill that morning, so maybe he hadn't lied entirely. "For what it's worth, Billy won't bother you again. I'll make sure of it." "By doing what? Beating him up? That'll just make things worse." "No. By talking to him when he's sober and explaining that men who can't respect the people who feed them don't belong at places like this. Chester will back me on that. He's a good foreman." Mara studied him. "You've known Chester for 2 weeks. How do you know he's good?" "Same way I knew the storm was coming. Observation." He headed for the door, then paused. "You ever notice how he assigns the younger hands to work with the older ones? Or how he rotates the unpleasant jobs so nobody gets stuck with the worst all the time? Or how he always asks if anyone's injured before he asks if the task is done? That's not just management. That's someone who gives a damn." After he left, Mara stood in the empty cookhouse, hands finally steady, and wondered how Evan Hale had learned to see so much in so little time. The storm he'd predicted arrived 3 days later, exactly when he'd said it would. It came out of the north like divine fury, dropping temperatures 20 degrees in an hour, wind screaming across the open range, snow falling so thick that the world disappeared into white chaos. Chester got all the hands into the bunkhouse and the horses into the barn, secured what could be secured, and everyone hunkered down to wait it out. Except Mara, who stayed in the cookhouse to keep the fires going and make sure there was hot food ready when the men needed it. And Evan, who showed up at the cookhouse door an hour after the storm hit, covered in snow, carrying an armload of firewood. "What are you doing?" she demanded, pulling him inside. "You should be in the bunkhouse." "Woodpile's close to the cookhouse. Figured you'd need more to keep the stoves running." He stomped snow off his boots. "I'll make a few more trips. Stack it inside so you don't have to go out." "Evan, that's practical," he finished. "Let me help." He made 4 more trips into the blizzard, each time coming back looking more like a snow sculpture than a man, until the cookhouse had enough wood to last 3 days if needed. Mara made him coffee, strong and hot, and when she handed him the mug, their fingers touched briefly. Just a moment of warmth against the cold. "Thank you," she said. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." They stood together by the window, watching the storm rage. The wind howled like something alive and angry, and snow piled against the cookhouse walls. Inside, the stove crackled, and the space between them felt simultaneously vast and very small. "You never talk about where you came from," Mara said, surprising herself. "Neither do you." "Fair point. Everyone's got a past," Evan said quietly. "Not all of it needs speaking. Is yours bad?" He was quiet for a long time. "Parts of it. Yeah. Me too." He looked at her then, and she saw recognition in his face. Not of her specifically, but of what she carried. Whatever had driven her west to this remote Montana ranch, to this job feeding strangers and keeping herself invisible, he understood it, recognized it, shared something like it. "The past can't find you if you keep moving," he said. "That's what I used to think." Used to? Starting to wonder if maybe standing still might be better, if maybe running just means you carry it all with you anyway, and at least if you stop, you can maybe set some of it down. He finished his coffee. "I should get back before Chester sends a search party." "Evan?" She touched his arm, brief and uncertain. "Whatever you're running from, or toward, I hope you find what you need here." His hand covered hers for just a moment. "Maybe I already did." Then he was gone, back into the storm, and Mara stood alone in the warm cookhouse with her heart beating faster than it had in 3 years. The storm lasted 2 days. When it finally broke, the world was transformed into something crystalline and beautiful and deadly quiet. Snowdrifts reached the cookhouse windows. The path to the bunkhouse had disappeared entirely. Chester organized the hands to dig out, feed the animals, check for damage. Evan worked alongside everyone else, never complaining about the cold or the exhausting work of moving snow that kept falling back into the paths they carved. But Mara noticed, because she'd started noticing everything about him, that he positioned himself to always have a view of the main approach to the ranch, that he sometimes stopped mid-shovel and just listened, head cocked, as if waiting for something. "You expecting someone?" she asked one afternoon, bringing hot soup to the men working near the barn. He startled slightly, the first time she'd seen him not completely in control. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you watch the horizon like someone who's waiting for bad news to arrive." He accepted the soup, cupping the bowl in his gloved hands. Old habit, hard to break. What kind of old habit? He met her eyes, and she saw him deciding something. The kind you develop when you've had people looking for you, when you've learned that peace is temporary and danger can show up any time. "Are you in trouble, Evan?" "Not anymore. I hope." He sipped the soup. "I'm trying to leave that behind. But sometimes the past doesn't care what you're trying to do." Before Mara could respond, a shout came from the barn. Young Tommy Reeves, barely 17, screaming for help. Everyone dropped what they were doing and ran. One of the bulls, agitated from being cooped up during the storm, had broken through a weakened stall door. Tommy had been mucking the next stall over and was now pinned in the corner, the massive animal pawing the ground between him and escape. 2,000 pounds of muscle and horns and pure aggression, and Tommy frozen with fear. Chester started formulating a plan, voice calm despite the urgency. Get ropes, distract the bull, create an opening. But before anyone could move, Evan was in motion. He vaulted the stall door and positioned himself between Tommy and the bull, arms spread wide, making himself the bigger target. The bull turned toward him, snorting, head lowering for the charge. "Easy," Evan said, voice impossibly calm. "Easy now. Nobody wants trouble here." The bull charged. What happened next took maybe 10 seconds but felt like an eternity. Evan didn't run. Instead, he moved at the last possible moment, using the bull's momentum against it, guiding those deadly horns past his body with a matador's precision while simultaneously grabbing Tommy and shoving him toward the stall door where other hands pulled him to safety. The bull wheeled for another charge, but Evan was already moving, creating distance, giving Chester and the others time to get ropes on the animal. It took 6 men to control the bull enough to get it into a secure pen, and by the time it was done, everyone was shaking. Everyone except Evan, who stood covered in straw and dust, breathing hard but steady. "Where the hell did you learn to move like that?" Chester demanded, half angry and half amazed. Evan looked at Tommy, making sure the boy was truly unhurt, then back at Chester. "Here and there, like I said. But it wasn't a skill learned here and there. It was training, specific, deliberate, the kind of body knowledge that came from violence survived and lessons learned at high cost. Mara saw it in the way he'd moved, in the controlled precision that had saved Tommy's life. She saw it, and she wondered what kind of past required a man to learn how to face down death without flinching. That night, after everyone else had eaten and returned to the bunkhouse still talking about the bull, Evan helped Mara clean up the cookhouse. It had become their routine, him staying late, helping without being asked, their conversations happening in the spaces between washing dishes and banking fires. "You could have been killed today," she said, scrubbing a pot harder than necessary. "But I wasn't. Tommy could have been killed." "But he wasn't." "Evan, I'm serious." He took the pot from her hands and set it aside, then turned her to face him. They were close enough that she could see the fading bruise on his jaw from where the bull had caught him, not as cleanly as everyone thought. Close enough to see the old scars on his hands, the kind that spoke of fights and hard living. "Mara, I've spent a long time running from who I used to be, trying to pretend that if I kept moving, kept working, kept my head down, I could become someone different. Someone better." His voice was rough with honesty. "Today I didn't think. I just acted. And maybe that's who I actually am. Not the man I'm trying to be, but the man I'm stuck being. Someone who knows violence, who's good at it, even when I don't want to be. You saved Tommy's life. Using skills I wish I didn't have." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against the bruise. "We're all made up of things we wish we weren't, but that doesn't mean we're only those things." He closed his eyes at her touch, leaning into it like someone who hadn't been touched gently in a long time. "What are you running from, Mara?" "A husband who thought his fists made him strong, a life that got smaller and smaller until I couldn't breathe, the woman I was before I learned to fight back." She kept her hand on his face, feeling him breathe. "I killed him, Evan. Not with my hands, but with my absence. I left, and he drank himself to death within a year, and sometimes I don't know if I'm hiding from guilt or relief." "Both," he said quietly. "It's always both." "Is that what you're hiding from? Something you did?" "Someone I was. Something I was part of." He opened his eyes, and in them she saw years of burden. "I rode with men who took what they wanted and hurt anyone who got in their way. I told myself I was just trying to survive, that I never pulled the trigger, that being there wasn't the same as doing it. I told myself a lot of lies." "But you left." "Eventually. After watching them do something I couldn't stomach anymore. After realizing that not pulling the trigger didn't make me innocent, just made me a coward who let others do the evil for me." His hands found hers. "I've been trying to make amends by living different, by being useful instead of destructive. But today made me realize that who I was is still in here, and I don't know if that ever really changes." Mara stepped closer until they were breathing the same air. "People don't change all at once. They change in moments, in decisions. You chose to save Tommy today. You choose to help me every day. You chose to stop running and maybe, possibly, start building something instead. What if my past catches up? What if the men I rode with come looking? Then we deal with it. Together, maybe. If you want." He searched her face like he was memorizing it. "Why would you want anything to do with someone like me?" "Because I understand. Because you notice when things are broken and you fix them. Because you make coffee right, and you've never once made me feel invisible or small." She smiled, sad and real. "Because maybe we're both broken in ways that fit together." He kissed her then, gentle and careful, like someone who knew how easily things could shatter. She kissed him back, 3 years of numbness cracking apart into something that felt dangerously close to hope. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm trying to be better, Mara. Every day I'm trying. I know. I see it. If trouble comes, we'll face it. You don't know what kind of trouble I mean. Doesn't matter. We'll still face it." He held her close as the cookhouse fires burned low and the Montana night pressed cold against the windows. Outside, the ranch slept beneath its blanket of snow. Inside, 2 people who'd been running from different hells stood still together, and for the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. But peace, as Evan had said, was temporary. 3 days later, a stranger rode into High Ridge Ranch, and the careful life they'd been building began to fall apart. The stranger arrived during breakfast, when the cookhouse was full of noise and the smell of bacon grease and fresh coffee. Mara noticed him first through the window, a lean figure on a gray horse, sitting too still at the edge of the property line, like he was deciding something. She felt the temperature in her chest drop several degrees, though she couldn't have said why. Evan noticed her noticing. He followed her gaze, and his entire body went rigid in a way that made every instinct in her body scream danger. "You know him?" she asked quietly. "Maybe. Can't tell from here." But his voice said he could tell, said he knew exactly who it was, said this was the trouble he'd been watching the horizon for. Chester saw the rider too and stepped outside, hand resting casually on the revolver he wore, casual the way a man who'd lived through range wars knew to be casual. The stranger dismounted and approached with his hands visible, which meant he either came in peace or was smart enough to pretend. "Help you?" Chester called out. "Looking for work. Heard you might have something available." The stranger's voice carried an accent Mara couldn't place, South, but not Texas. Alabama, maybe, or Georgia. "We're pretty full up right now. Try the Henderson place about 15 miles east. I'd prefer here, if it's all the same." The stranger smiled, and there was something predatory in it. "Name's Daniel Cross. I'm a hard worker, good with horses, better with cattle, won't cause trouble." Inside the cookhouse, Evan had gone completely still, the way a rabbit freezes when the hawk's shadow passes overhead. Mara reached under the table and found his hand. It was cold and clenched into a fist. Chester was sizing up Daniel Cross with the practiced eye of a man who'd hired hundreds of ranch hands and learned to spot the dangerous ones. "You got references?" "Worked the Broken Arrow Ranch in Colorado last season. Before that, various operations in Wyoming." "Those are big territories. Any place specific?" Cross's smile widened. "Here and there," the exact same phrase Evan had used when he'd arrived. Mara felt Evan's hand tighten around hers until her bones ground together. Chester must have caught something wrong in the exchange because his voice cooled by several degrees. "I'll need specific references before I take on new men. Write down the names of your last 3 foremen and their locations. If they vouch for you, come back in a week." "That seems unnecessary. Those are my terms." Cross looked past Chester toward the cookhouse, and his gaze swept across the window. For one terrible moment, Mara thought he made eye contact with Evan, thought she saw recognition flash across his face. Then he tipped his hat. "Fair enough. I'll get you those references." He mounted up and rode out, but he didn't head east toward the Henderson place. He rode north into the broken country where the arroyos cut deep and a man could watch the ranch from cover. The moment he disappeared from sight, Evan stood up so fast his chair crashed backward. "I need to talk to Chester. Now." He was out the door before Mara could respond, leaving his breakfast half-eaten and 30 ranch hands staring after him in confusion. She forced herself to stay calm, to keep pouring coffee and serving biscuits, to act like nothing was wrong even though her hands wanted to shake. Through the window she watched Evan and Chester in intense conversation near the barn. Chester's face grew harder with each sentence Evan spoke. At one point, Chester looked back toward the north, hand going to his gun again, and Mara knew that whatever Evan was telling him, it was bad enough that even a man like Chester Holbrook, who'd survived Comanche raids and outlaw gangs and every hard thing the West could throw at a person, was worried. Billy Cortez, who'd been subdued and respectful since his drunken incident, leaned toward the window. "What do you suppose that's about?" "None of our business," Mara said firmly. "New guy looked like trouble." "Most strangers do until you know them." Billy grunted. "Yeah, but some stay trouble even after you know them." She couldn't argue with that. The breakfast crowd finally dispersed to their daily tasks, leaving Mara alone with dirty dishes and a growing sense of dread. She was scrubbing the cast-iron skillets when Evan returned, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the last 30 minutes. "Chester knows," he said without preamble. "I told him everything." And he's deciding whether to keep me on or send me packing before I bring trouble down on the ranch." Mara dried her hands and turned to face him fully. "Did you recognize that man?" "Daniel Cross. Yeah, I recognized him. He rode with the men I used to ride with. He's not here looking for work, Mara. He's here scouting, which means Cole Rafferty knows where I am." The name hit the air like a stone into still water. "Cole Rafferty, the gang leader you mentioned before." "Yeah." The man I testified against when I finally got away. The man who swore he'd put a bullet in me for turning on him. Evan's laugh was bitter and sharp. I thought I'd hidden well enough, thought 3 years of keeping my head down, using my real name instead of the alias I rode under, working honest work. I thought it would be enough. But Cole's patient. Cole's thorough. And Cole never forgets. How did they find you? Does it matter? They found me. And now everyone here is in danger because of it. She crossed to him and took his face in both hands, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me. You are not responsible for what violent men choose to do. You left them. You changed your life. You've been trying to make amends. Their decisions are theirs, not yours. Tell that to Tommy if he catches a stray bullet. Tell that to Chester if his ranch gets burned down. Tell that to you if... His voice cracked. I should leave. Right now. Lead them away from here. Running didn't work before. Why would it work now? At least I'd be the only one hurt. You think I want that? She pulled him closer, fierce and frightened. You think I want you out there alone with men who want you dead? You think that makes me safer? Makes any of us safer? They already know you're here, Evan. Leaving now just means you face them without backup. This isn't your fight. The hell it isn't. You made it mine when you fixed my door hinge. When you faced down Billy for me. When you kissed me like I was something worth caring about. Her voice dropped to something raw. You made it mine when I fell in love with you, you stubborn bastard. He stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. You... what? I love you. I don't want to. It's terrifying and probably stupid, but I do. So you don't get to make decisions about leaving without me having a say. Mara? No, you listen. I spent 3 years hiding from life, from feeling anything, from being anything except invisible. You changed that. You saw me when I didn't want to be seen, and you made me remember what it feels like to be alive. I'm not letting you walk away from that. I'm not letting you walk away from us. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. When they broke apart, his forehead pressed against hers, his breathing ragged. I don't deserve you. Probably not. I don't deserve you either. But maybe we deserve each other, which is something. The door opened and Chester walked in, his weathered face grim. We need to talk. All of us. They sat at the long table where 30 men ate breakfast every morning, and Chester laid out the situation with military precision. He'd sent 2 of his most trusted hands, older men who'd fought in the war, to track Daniel Cross and see where he went. He'd also sent riders to the neighboring ranches to warn them about possible trouble, and he'd gathered the core crew, the men who'd been at High Ridge for years, who'd proven themselves loyal and steady, to explain what was coming. Evans told me about his past, Chester said to the assembled group. 8 men total, including Billy Cortez, who'd apparently earned enough trust to be included. He rode with Cole Rafferty's gang 5 years ago. He got out, testified against them, and thought he'd left that life behind. Now they found him, and they're likely planning to hit the ranch. Why not just take Evan in town and shoot him there, asked Marcus Webb, a grizzled cowhand who'd been at High Ridge since before Chester arrived. Why come here? Because Cole Rafferty's got a reputation to maintain, Evans said quietly. He can't let anyone think they can walk away from his gang and live peaceful. He needs to make an example. Needs it to be public and brutal so no one else gets ideas about leaving. So we're all targets, Billy said, just by association. Yes. Billy was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Okay, so we make the ranch hard to hit. We set up watch rotations, get the weapons cleaned and ready, make sure we know every approach route. I served in the cavalry before I took up ranch work. I know how to prepare a defensive position. Chester raised an eyebrow. You're willing to stay? To fight? Evan saved Tommy's life. He's been straight with us. And I owe him for not beating me senseless when I was drunk and stupid. Billy looked at Evan directly. We all got pasts we ain't proud of. Difference is whether we keep being that person or try to be better. You're trying. That's enough for me. One by one, the other men nodded agreement. Not because they were brave, though they were, but because this was the code that governed life on the frontier. You stood with your crew. You defended your land. You didn't abandon people just because trouble came knocking. Mara, Chester said, this is going to get dangerous. I can arrange for you to go stay with the Henderson family until this blows over. No, she said simply. This isn't a request, and it isn't a debate. She met his eyes steadily. These men need to eat. They need someone to tend injuries when the fighting starts. They need someone who can reload weapons and carry ammunition and do the 100 other things that keep a defensive position running. I'm staying. You could die. I've been dying slowly for 3 years. At least this way I'm choosing to live first. Chester looked between her and Evan, saw something in their faces, and sighed. You two are going to be the death of me. Fine. Everyone stays. We prepare for war. The next 3 days transformed High Ridge Ranch from a working cattle operation into a fortress. They brought all the livestock into secure pastures close to the buildings. They stockpiled food, water, and ammunition. They reinforced doors and windows, created clear lines of sight, established fallback positions. Billy proved to be as good as his word, organizing the defenses with practiced efficiency. Evan worked like a man possessed, barely sleeping, constantly checking the perimeter. Mara watched him wear himself down with worry and guilt, watched him try to carry the weight of everyone's safety on his shoulders. On the third night, she found him in the barn, supposedly checking on the horses, but really just standing in the shadows, staring at nothing. You need to rest, she said softly. Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see how this could go wrong. All the ways people could get hurt because of me. She stepped close and wrapped her arms around him from behind, feeling the tension in his body. You're not alone in this. Stop acting like you are. I brought this here. No, Cole Rafferty brought this here. You just tried to build a life. She pressed her cheek against his back. Tell me about them, the gang, what we're actually facing. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then slowly, he began to talk. There were 12 of us at the peak. Cole was the leader, smart, cruel, patient. He planned jobs that other gangs wouldn't touch because they required too much thought. Banks, payroll shipments, wealthy ranchers. We hit hard and disappeared clean, and anyone who got in the way, he trailed off. Got hurt, Mara finished. Or worse. I told myself I was just holding horses, just keeping watch, just driving wagons. But I was there. I was part of it. And the things I saw, his voice roughened. There was a job in Nebraska, a bank. It was supposed to be simple, in and out, no one hurt. But the bank manager tried to be a hero, pulled a gun. Cole shot him. Then Cole shot the clerk who screamed. Then he shot a customer who ran for the door. Just kept shooting until the whole place was silent, except for the ringing in our ears. And that's when you left? That's when I knew I had to. But it took me another 6 months to actually do it. 6 months of lying to myself, telling myself I could change things from the inside, telling myself it wasn't my fault. He turned in her arms to face her. Then we hit a ranch. Homesteaders, family with kids. Cole wanted their horses, said they were good stock. The father refused to sell at the price Cole offered, which was half what they were worth. So Cole decided to just take them. Mara already knew how this story ended, could see it in Evan's eyes. The father fought back. Cole killed him in front of his wife and children, and then he laughed about it. Laughed, said the man should have known better than to refuse a reasonable offer. Evan's hands tightened on her arms. I left that night, took one of the horses, felt like I owed that family something, and rode out. Kept riding until I found a sheriff who'd listen. Testified in federal court 6 months later. They convicted 8 members of the gang, including Cole. But 3 of them got away, and Cole escaped from custody during transport to prison. Daniel Cross was one of the ones who got away? Yeah, him and 2 others. Marcus Reed and a kid we called Slim, though his real name's Jim Coulter. They've been running with Cole for 2 years, rebuilding the gang, doing smaller jobs. And now they found me. She cupped his face, feeling the stubble rough against her palms. How many will come? Cole doesn't do anything small. If he's coming for me, he'll bring 10 or 12 men. Make it overwhelming. Make it impossible to fight back so the message is clear. You don't cross Cole Rafferty and survive. Except you already did survive, and you're going to keep surviving. He managed a weak smile. You've got a lot of faith in a man you've only known a few weeks. I've got faith in the man you've been every single one of those weeks. The man who saved Tommy, the man who fixes broken things, the man who sees people when they need seeing. She kissed him softly. The man who's worth fighting for. I don't know how this ends, Mara. Neither do I. But I know we face it together. They stood in the quiet barn, holding each other while the horses shifted in their stalls and the night pressed dark against the walls, and neither of them said what they were both thinking, that together might not be enough. The attack came at dawn on the fourth day, which was both predictable and tactically sound. Dawn meant low light, tired guards, people moving around for breakfast, confusion that could be exploited. Mara was already in the cookhouse, starting the fires, when she heard the first gunshot. It came from the north watch post, followed immediately by Chester's voice bellowing for everyone to take positions. Her hands didn't shake as she grabbed the rifle Chester had insisted she keep in the cookhouse. 3 years of rebuilding herself into something stronger meant she didn't freeze, didn't panic. She moved to the reinforced window and took up the position they'd practiced. Outside, chaos erupted. Riders poured in from 3 directions, north, east, and west, just like Billy had predicted. 12 men, heavily armed, firing as they came. But Chester's preparations paid off. The ranch hands were in position, behind cover, with clear lines of fire. The initial volley from the defenders dropped 2 attackers from their horses. Evan was at the barn, working with Billy and Marcus to protect the horses and create a strong point. She could see him moving with fluid precision, that combat knowledge he'd tried to bury now deployed to keep people alive. He fired, moved, fired again, economical and effective. The raiders weren't stupid. They'd expected resistance, but not this level of preparation. They pulled back to the tree line to regroup, and in the brief lull, Chester came sprinting to the cookhouse. You okay? Fine. They've got us outnumbered, but we've got better position. Yeah, but they've got something else. Chester pointed toward the north. See that smoke? She looked and felt her stomach drop, black smoke rising from the direction of the northern pastures. They're burning the range land, creating confusion, cutting off one of our retreat routes, and potentially drawing us out to save the cattle. Chester's face was grim. Cole Rafferty's smart. This isn't just about killing Evan. He wants to destroy everything. Show that harboring a traitor has consequences. What do we do? We hold. The cattle can't outrun fire anyway, and splitting our forces is exactly what he wants. We hold here and hope they get tired of losing men before we run out of ammunition. The second assault came 15 minutes later, more coordinated than the first. The raiders split into groups, laying down covering fire while others advanced on the buildings. Mara fired at targets she'd never imagined shooting at, real people trying to kill her friends. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and somewhere in the chaos, she hit someone. She saw him fall and felt sick and kept shooting anyway because stopping meant dying. The cookhouse window shattered from a rifle round that passed close enough to her head that she felt the air move. Chester pulled her back from the window, and she realized she was bleeding from flying glass. You're hit. It's nothing. Keep shooting. Time stopped meaning anything. There was only the immediate moment. Aim, fire, reload, aim again. Her world narrowed to the window frame, to targets and cover, and the desperate mathematics of survival. Someone screamed from the bunkhouse. She didn't know who, couldn't afford to know. Then Evan's voice cut through the gunfire, loud enough to carry across the ranch. Cole, I know you're out there. This is between us. Let's finish it. No, Mara whispered. Don't do this. But Evan was already walking out from the barn, rifle slung across his back, hands visible. Walking into the open like he was inviting death to come find him. The shooting stopped. In the terrible silence that followed, a man rode out from the tree line. He was tall and thin, dressed in black, with cold eyes and a smile that made Mara's skin crawl. Cole Rafferty, who laughed at murder and made examples of betrayal. Evan Hale, Cole called out. Been a long time. Not long enough. You cost me 3 years in chains, cost me 8 good men, cost me reputation and money and respect. Cole's horse moved closer. You know what you owe me for that? My life. I know. That's why I'm offering a deal. You take me right now, and you ride away. Leave these people alone. They don't mean anything to you. See, that's where you're wrong. Cole's smile widened. They mean everything to me, because you care about them. Because making you watch them suffer before you die, that's worth more than just putting a bullet in your head. Evan's hand twitched toward his gun, but he stilled himself. There's a dozen of you and 8 of us. You might win, but it'll cost you. Half your men dead, maybe more. Is revenge worth that? It is when the lesson matters more than the cost. Mara couldn't breathe. She watched the 2 men facing each other in the yard, one who'd tried to escape his past, one who embodied the worst of it, and she knew Evan was trying to sacrifice himself, trying to buy their lives with his own. She wouldn't let him. Before Chester could stop her, before she even fully formed the thought, Mara grabbed the rifle and stepped out onto the cookhouse porch. He's not alone, Cole. You want him? You go through all of us. Chester swore and followed her out. Then Billy emerged from the barn. Then Marcus. Then Tommy Reeves, still bruised from the bull but steady with a shotgun. One by one, every man on the ranch stepped into the open, weapons ready, forming a line between Cole Rafferty and Evan Hale. You're all willing to die for a traitor? Cole's voice carried disbelief. He's not a traitor, Chester said. He's one of ours, and we take care of our own. Cole studied them for a long moment, and Mara saw him doing the calculation. How many of his men would die trying to break through that line? Whether the revenge was worth the cost. She saw him arrive at an answer she didn't like. Fine, Cole said. But understand what you've chosen, all of you. You've made yourselves targets. Today, tomorrow, next year. My people will find you, one by one if necessary, and when they do, you'll remember that you could have walked away. Maybe, Evan said quietly, but we'd rather die standing together than live knowing we abandoned each other. That's something you never understood, Cole. Loyalty isn't about fear. It's about choice. For just a moment, something flickered across Cole's face, not quite regret, but recognition of something he'd lost or maybe never had. Then his expression hardened into pure malice. Burn it. Burn all of it. The raiders opened fire again, but this time with a different purpose. Not to kill, but to destroy. They threw torches at buildings, shot at anything that would hold fuel. The barn caught first, flames racing up the dry wood despite the recent snow. Then the bunkhouse. The ranch hands scattered back to defensive positions, but it was chaos now, fighting fire while fighting men, trying to save buildings while staying alive. Mara lost track of Evan in the smoke and confusion. She saw Billy take a bullet in the leg and dragged him toward the cookhouse. Saw Marcus drop 2 raiders but catch return fire in the shoulder. The world was burning and bleeding and dying, and she couldn't find Evan anywhere. Then through the smoke she saw him, locked in hand-to-hand combat with Daniel Cross near the barn. Cross had lost his gun and pulled a knife, and Evan was defending with nothing but his bare hands and desperation. They fought with brutal efficiency, every move designed to maim or kill, and Mara couldn't get a clear shot without risking hitting Evan. She ran toward them instead, screaming his name, and that momentary distraction cost him. Cross's knife got through his guard and opened a long gash across Evan's ribs. He went down hard, and Cross raised the knife for a killing blow. Mara fired. The bullet took Cross in the chest, and he dropped like a puppet with cut strings. She reached Evan and pulled him behind cover, his blood hot and slick on her hands. Stay with me. Please stay with me. I'm okay, he gasped. Just a cut. That's not a cut, that's... She pressed her hand against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. Mara, you need to get inside. This isn't over. An explosion cut off his words. The barn collapsed inward, the fire so intense now that the structure couldn't hold. Horses screamed and men rushed to get them out, but the heat drove everyone back. Chester was shouting orders, trying to organize a retreat to the main house, the most defensible position. But the smoke made it impossible to see, impossible to coordinate. Raiders and ranch hands fought in pockets across the property, and Mara couldn't tell who was winning anymore. All she knew was that Evan was hurt, and she had to keep him alive. She got Evan to the cookhouse through sheer willpower and desperation, half dragging him while he tried to protest that he could walk. Blood soaked through her dress, his or hers or both. She'd lost track of whose wounds were whose in the chaos. Inside, Billy was already there, his leg wrapped in a rough bandage, and Marcus slumped against the wall holding his shoulder, his face gray with pain. How bad? Billy asked, reaching for his rifle with his free hand. Bad enough. Mara laid Evan on the floor near the stove where the light was best. His shirt was ruined, the knife wound a long, angry slash across his ribs that wouldn't stop bleeding. She grabbed clean towels and pressed them against the wound. "We need a doctor." "Nearest doctor's in town, 20 miles away," Marcus said through gritted teeth. Even if someone could ride through this, they'd never make it past the raiders. "Then I'll do it myself." She'd seen enough injuries on the ranch to know the basics. Clean the wound, stop the bleeding, pray infection didn't set in. She'd never worked on someone she loved before, never felt her hands shake with the terror of losing them. Evan's hand caught hers, slick with blood. "Mara, you need to focus on defending this position. I'll be fine." "You're bleeding everywhere. You're not fine." "I've had worse." "That doesn't comfort me like you think it does." Outside, the gunfire had become sporadic, single shots instead of sustained volleys. Through the shattered window, Mara could see the barn was completely engulfed now, the flames reaching toward the gray dawn sky. The bunkhouse was burning too, though not as fiercely. Men moved through the smoke like ghosts, and she couldn't tell anymore who was friend and who was enemy. Then Chester's voice rang out, clear and commanding despite the chaos. "Fall back! Everyone to the main house! Now!" Billy struggled to his feet using his rifle as a crutch. "Can he walk?" Mara looked at Evan, at the blood still seeping through the towels despite her pressure. "He's going to have to." They got him upright through combined effort, Evan biting back sounds of pain that made Mara's chest ache. Marcus took point despite his wounded shoulder. Billy hobbled behind, and Mara kept one arm around Evan's waist, feeling him lean on her more than pride wanted to allow. The distance from the cookhouse to the main house was maybe 50 yards, but it felt like miles. They moved through smoke so thick Mara could barely see 3 feet ahead, the air burning her lungs with each breath. Somewhere to her left, a man screamed, cut off abruptly in a way that meant death. She forced herself to keep moving, to not think about who it might have been. A figure emerged from the smoke directly in front of them, rifle raised. Marcus fired instinctively, and the raider went down. But the shot drew attention. 2 more raiders converged on their position, and suddenly they were pinned down behind an overturned water trough, trapped in the open with wounded men and diminishing ammunition. "Go," Evan said, trying to push Mara away. "Get to the house. I'll hold them here." "Absolutely not." "Mara, I'm slowing you down." "Then I guess we're slow together." She fired at a shape moving through the smoke, didn't wait to see if she hit. "I didn't drag you this far to leave you now." Billy took out one raider with a shot that shouldn't have been possible given his leg wound, and Marcus got the other, and somehow they made it the last 20 yards to the main house, where Chester and 3 other ranch hands were fortifying the entrance. "Inside, quick!" Chester grabbed Evan's other arm and helped haul him through the door. "That everyone?" "Tommy's still out there," one of the hands said. "Saw him near the corral last I looked." "Damn it!" Chester started for the door. "I'll go," Evan said, trying to stand and immediately falling back against the wall. "He's there because of me." "You'll go nowhere except to a bed before you bleed out," Mara said flatly. She looked at Chester. "I'll go. I'm faster than you, and everyone else is wounded or needed here for defense." "Mara, no," Evan started. She kissed him quickly, fiercely. "I love you, which means I'm not letting that boy die because you feel guilty. Stay here. Stay alive. I'll be back." She didn't wait for a response, didn't let herself think about what she was doing or the fact that she'd never been in combat before today, that she was a cook pretending to be a soldier. She just grabbed a rifle and went back out into the hell that High Ridge Ranch had become. The smoke was thicker now, the dawn light filtered through it in shades of orange and gray. Bodies lay scattered across the yard. She tried not to look at faces, tried not to identify them as men she'd fed breakfast to every morning. The corral was on the far side of the burning barn, which meant she had to go around or through the worst of the fire. She chose around, keeping low, moving from cover to cover the way she'd seen Evan and the others do. Her heart hammered so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Every shadow could be a raider. Every sound could be a bullet meant for her. Then she heard Tommy's voice, young and terrified. "Help! Someone help me!" She found him trapped under part of the corral fence that had collapsed, his leg pinned, flames from the barn creeping closer with each passing second. His face was streaked with soot and tears, and when he saw her, relief and shame warred in his expression. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I got trapped and I couldn't. Save it for later. She grabbed the fence post and pulled. It didn't budge. The wood was heavy, waterlogged from the snow, and she wasn't strong enough. Can you push while I pull? I'll try. They strained together, Mara pulling until her muscles screamed and her hands bled from splinters. The fence post shifted an inch, then another. Tommy was sobbing with pain and effort, and the heat from the approaching flames was intense enough that Mara's skin felt like it was blistering. Again, she gasped. One more time. Ready? They pulled and pushed with everything they had, and the fence post finally lifted enough for Tommy to drag his leg free. She hauled him upright, got his arm around her shoulders, and they lurched away from the flames with seconds to spare. Behind them, the corral fence caught fire and became an inferno. Can you walk? I think my leg's broken. Then hop. We need to move. They made it 10 feet before a voice stopped them cold. Well, look what we have here. Cole Rafferty stood between them and the house, revolver in hand, smile on his face. 2 of his men flanked him, and beyond them Mara could see at least 3 more raiders still active. The attack hadn't killed them all. Not even close. The cook, Cole said, studying her with predatory interest. The one Evan's sweet on, if his face when you stepped out earlier was any indication. Tell me, does he know you're out here playing hero? Let the boy go, Mara said, keeping her voice steady, though her legs wanted to give out. Your fight's with Evan, not with a kid. See, that's where you're wrong. My fight's with everyone who chose to stand with him. Everyone who thought they could defy me and live to tell about it. Cole cocked the revolver. The boy stays. You stay. And when I'm done here, I'm going to make Evan watch what happens to people he cares about. That's the lesson. That's what happens when you betray Cole Rafferty. Tommy was shaking against her side, and Mara felt a strange calm settle over her. She'd come out here to save him. If that meant buying his escape with her life, then so be it. At least she'd spent her last weeks loving someone instead of hiding. At least she'd fought back. Run, she whispered to Tommy. When I move, you run for the house. But you... Run. She shoved Tommy hard toward the house and raised her rifle toward Cole, knowing she'd never get the shot off in time, but trying anyway, because surrender had never been in her nature. Not really. She saw Cole's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the barrel swing toward her, saw death coming and met it without flinching. The shot that rang out didn't come from Cole's gun. It came from behind her, and Cole Rafferty jerked backward as the bullet caught him high in the chest. He staggered, face registering shock, then fury. His men turned to face this new threat, and Mara followed their gaze. Evan stood there, barely upright, one hand pressed to his wounded side, and the other holding a smoking rifle. He looked like he should be dead, pale as milk, blood-soaked, swaying on his feet. But his eyes were clear and his aim was steady, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the yard with absolute finality. It ends now, Cole. Between us. Let everyone else go. Cole laughed, a wet sound that spoke of serious damage. You can barely stand. You think you can finish this? I know I can. Question is whether your men want to die for your revenge, or whether they're smart enough to ride away while they still can. The 2 raiders flanking Cole exchanged glances. One of them slowly lowered his weapon. I didn't sign up to die for this, Cole. We hit the ranch. We made our point. Time to go. You leave now, and I'll hunt you down myself, Cole snarled. You'll be dead yourself in about 10 minutes with that chest wound, the raider said flatly. I'm out. He mounted up and rode off. The second raider followed. One by one, the surviving members of Cole's gang melted away into the smoke and morning light, leaving just Cole standing in the yard, bleeding and furious, and finally alone. They abandoned you, Evan said, moving closer despite the obvious agony each step cost him. Just like you abandoned everyone who ever rode with you. That's what loyalty built on fear gets you, Cole. Nothing at the end. Cole raised his revolver with shaking hands. Then I'll take you with me. He fired. The bullet went wide, not by much, but enough. Chester and 3 ranch hands emerged from the house then, weapons trained on Cole, and the gang leader finally seemed to understand that it was over, that he'd lost. You should have stayed hidden, Cole said to Evan, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Should have kept running, would have lived longer. Maybe, but I wouldn't have lived better. Evan looked past Cole toward Mara, and his expression softened into something that made her chest tight. Running was just dying slowly. At least here I found something worth standing for. Cole tried to raise his gun again, but his strength failed. He dropped to his knees, then pitched forward into the dirt. Chester checked for a pulse, then shook his head. The man who'd terrorized territories, murdered innocents, and ruled through fear had bled out in a ranch yard, abandoned by his own men, dying for nothing but pride. Mara ran to Evan as he collapsed. She caught him before he hit the ground, lowering him carefully while Chester barked orders about getting the fires under control and tending to the wounded. Tommy hobbled over, tears streaming down his face, apologizing over and over until Billy told him to shut up and go get bandages. "You were supposed to stay in the house," Mara said, her own tears coming now that the danger had passed. "You were supposed to not play hero," Evan countered weakly. His face was the color of old newspaper, and his breathing was shallow. "Guess we're both bad at following orders. Don't you dare die on me. Not after all this. Not after I finally—" Her voice broke. "You don't get to save me and then die. That's not how this works." "Wasn't planning on dying." He managed a pained smile. "Got too much living left to do. With you. If you'll have me." "You stubborn, reckless, wonderful man. Of course I'll have you." She pressed her forehead to his, careful not to jostle his wounds. "But first you have to survive long enough for me to yell at you properly for risking your life like that." "Looking forward to it." Marcus appeared with actual medical supplies. Apparently the main house had a proper kit, and Mara let him take over the emergency treatment while she held Evan's hand and refused to let go. Around them, the ranch hands worked to save what could be saved. The barn was a total loss. The bunkhouse badly damaged but salvageable. 3 ranch hands had been killed in the fighting, and 2 more were seriously wounded. Of the raiders, 7 lay dead on the property, and the rest had fled. The cost had been high, but they'd survived. By midday, riders arrived from the neighboring ranches. The men Chester had sent warning to, coming with supplies and reinforcements. They brought a doctor from town, an older man named Morrison, who took one look at Evan and whistled low. "Surprised you're still breathing with that wound. Lucky the knife didn't go deeper." "Lucky had nothing to do with it," Mara said fiercely. "He's strong. He'll heal." Dr. Morrison glanced at her, at the blood covering her dress, and the protective way she hovered over Evan, and smiled slightly. "Yes, ma'am, I expect he will. With proper care and someone making sure he doesn't do anything stupid during recovery." "I'll make sure." The doctor cleaned and stitched the knife wound, a process that had Evan gritting his teeth and Mara holding his hand hard enough to hurt. 15 stitches total, plus treatment for various other injuries Evan had accumulated during the fight. When it was done, the doctor pronounced him lucky to be alive and ordered complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Evan protested. The ranch needs you alive more than it needs you working, Chester said, appearing in the doorway. He looked exhausted, his face lined with grief for the men they'd lost. "We can handle the cleanup and repairs. You handle healing. That's an order." After the doctor left to tend to the other wounded, Chester pulled up a chair beside where Evan lay on a makeshift bed in the main house parlor. Mara started to excuse herself, but Chester waved her back. "You should hear this too, both of you." He rubbed his face, suddenly looking every one of his 50-plus years. "I talked to the sheriff who rode out with Doc Morrison. Cole Rafferty was wanted for murder and robbery across 3 territories. There's no outstanding warrants for you, Evan. Your testimony 5 years ago cleared you of all charges related to the gang's activities. I know, federal prosecutor made that deal. What you apparently don't know is that same prosecutor's been looking for you. Seems Cole escaped from custody by having his remaining gang members ambush the transport. They killed 2 marshals in the process. The prosecutor wanted to put you in protective custody, keep you safe in case Cole came looking. That's why your name's been flagged in law enforcement circles." Evan stared at him. I assumed I was still a wanted man, that testifying hadn't been enough to clear my name." "It was enough. You've been free this whole time. You just didn't know it." Chester shook his head. "You've been running from nothing, son. Running from ghosts and guilt, but not from the law." The information seemed to hit Evan harder than any physical blow. He closed his eyes, and Mara saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. 3 years of hiding, 3 years of keeping his head down and expecting every stranger to be a threat. All of it unnecessary. There's something else, Chester continued. Something I should have told you from the beginning, but I had my reasons for keeping quiet. High Ridge Ranch. It's not owned by some distant rancher in Chicago like I let everyone believe. Mara felt suddenly cold. Then who owns it? Chester looked at Evan. Your family did. Your father, specifically. William Hale. He bought this land 30 years ago, built it from nothing. When he died 8 years back, it passed to you. You've been the owner all along. The silence that followed was absolute. Mara couldn't process what she was hearing. Evan, the quiet drifter who'd shown up asking only for work and coffee, owned the land they were standing on. Had owned it the whole time. That's not possible, Evan said finally, his voice hollow. My father disowned me when I rode away at 17, said I wasn't his son anymore. He said a lot of things when he was angry, but he never changed his will. When you came back here 3 weeks ago, I recognized you immediately. You looked just like him. Same eyes, same way of standing, same stubborn set to your jaw. I'd been managing the ranch since his death, looking for you on and off, hoping you'd eventually come home. When you showed up asking for work under your real name, not the alias you used with the gang, I knew you were trying to start over, so I gave you that chance. You let me work as a ranch hand on my own property. I let you figure out who you wanted to be without the weight of ownership forcing your hand. Would you have stayed if I'd told you the truth that first day, or would you have run again? Evan had no answer for that. I was wrong to keep it from you this long, Chester admitted, but I wanted you to choose this place because you wanted it, not because you inherited it. I wanted you to see that High Ridge could be a home, not just a piece of land. Mara found her voice, though it came out smaller than intended. Why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't my secret to tell. And because I wasn't sure yet whether Evan would stay or disappear again. Chester stood, his knees cracking. For what it's worth, you've both proven yourselves 10 times over. This ranch wouldn't have survived today without both of you, without all of us standing together. He left them alone in the parlor. Outside, men shouted instructions about putting out the last of the fires and beginning the cleanup. The sounds of normalcy trying to reassert itself over violence. Life continuing because it had to. Evan still hadn't looked at her. I didn't know, Mara. I swear I didn't know. I believe you. And she did. But belief didn't make the revelation any less staggering. All this time, I've been cooking in your cookhouse, living on your land, and you were just working alongside everyone else. Because I am everyone else, or I was trying to be. He finally met her eyes, and in them she saw fear, not of violence or death, but of loss, of losing her specifically. Does it change things between us? I don't know, she said honestly. I need time to process this. You're not just Evan Hale, the drifter trying to outrun his past. You're Evan Hale, the owner of High Ridge Ranch. That's a lot bigger than coffee and fixed door hinges. I'm still the same person. Are you? Because the same person who kissed me in the cookhouse was someone without power over my employment, my housing, my entire life. Now you're my employer, my landlord. That changes the dynamic whether you want it to or not. The hurt in his face was immediate and profound. I would never use that against you. Never. I know you wouldn't, but that doesn't mean the power imbalance doesn't exist. She stood, suddenly needing distance. I need air. I need to think. Mara, please. I'm not leaving. I just need space. Time. Can you give me that? He nodded, looking like she'd put a knife in him worse than Daniel Cross had. Take all the time you need. She walked out of the parlor, through the main house that apparently belonged to the man she loved, and out into the afternoon where the smoke still hung thick and the evidence of battle littered the ground. Men were dragging raider bodies to one location, treating them with more respect than they'd shown in life because that's what decent people did. Other men were organizing bucket brigades to save the buildings that could still be saved. Tommy saw her and hobbled over on his splinted leg. Miss Mara? You okay? I don't know, Tommy. I honestly don't know. I just wanted to say thank you for coming back for me, for risking your life when you didn't have to. She managed a smile that felt like breaking. You're welcome. Next time, don't get yourself pinned under a fence during a gunfight. Yes, ma'am, there won't be a next time. I promise. She helped where she could, bringing water to the workers, checking on the wounded, doing the practical things that kept her hands busy and her mind from spiraling. But underneath the activity, she kept circling back to the same question. Who was Evan Hale, really? The guilty man running from his past? The quiet drifter who fixed broken things? The ranch hand who saved lives without thinking? The owner of the property who'd hidden his identity from everyone? All of them. None of them. Something in between. And where did that leave her? The cook who'd fallen for someone she thought understood what it meant to be invisible, to be just another worker trying to survive. Except he'd never been invisible. He'd been the most important person on the property the entire time, whether he acknowledged it or not. As the sun set on the ruins of High Ridge Ranch, painting the smoke-filled sky in shades of red and gold, Mara sat on what remained of the cookhouse steps and let herself cry for the first time since the shooting started. She cried for the men who'd died, for the innocents lost, for the simple life that had been shattered by violence and revelation, and for the impossible complexity of loving someone who'd just become infinitely more complicated than she'd ever imagined. She stayed on those steps until full darkness fell, and the temperature dropped enough that her breath made clouds in the air. The sounds of cleanup had quieted to occasional voices and the creak of wagon wheels as men hauled debris to burn piles. Someone had gotten lanterns lit around the property, small islands of light in the vast Montana darkness. Billy found her there, limping on his bandaged leg, carrying 2 tin cups of something that steamed in the cold. Figured you could use this. It's not good, but it's hot. She accepted the cup. Coffee, barely drinkable, but warm. Thank you. He settled beside her with a grunt of pain, stretching his injured leg out carefully. Hell of a day. That's one way to put it. They sat in silence for a while, drinking terrible coffee and watching the ranch try to put itself back together. Finally, Billy spoke again, his voice careful. He didn't know, about owning the place. Chester told me the whole story while Doc Morrison was working on my leg. Evan came back here thinking he was just another hired hand. I know. That doesn't make it less complicated. No, I suppose it doesn't. Billy took another sip. For what it's worth, he's been working harder than anyone, doing the worst jobs without complaint. If he knew he owned the place, he's the worst boss I've ever seen, actually doing the work instead of ordering other people around. That's not the point, Billy. Then what is the point? Because from where I'm sitting, the man saved my life today. Saved all our lives. He could have run when Cole showed up. Could have led them away and left us out of it. Instead, he stood and fought, nearly died for it. And now you're out here crying because he happens to own the dirt we're standing on? The words stung because they held truth. You don't understand. Try me. She was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. 3 years ago, I left a man who owned me. Not legally, I wasn't his property, but he controlled everything. Where I went, who I talked to, what I wore, what I thought. He used money and intimidation and violence to make me smaller and smaller until I was barely a person anymore. When I finally left, I swore I'd never put myself in that position again. I'd never let anyone have power over me like that. And now Evan does. Have power over you. Yes, he can fire me, evict me, make my life hell if he chooses. And the worst part is that I know he wouldn't, that he's not that kind of man. But the power exists whether he uses it or not. That imbalance exists, and I don't know how to love someone when they hold all the cards and I'm holding nothing. Billy was quiet, considering. Can I tell you something about my time in the cavalry? All right. I served under a captain named Morrison, no relation to the doctor. He was the best officer I ever knew. Fair, brave, cared about his men more than his own advancement. We'd have followed him into hell if he'd asked. But here's the thing. He had absolute power over us. Could have us flogged, imprisoned, even executed for desertion. He held life and death in his hands. That's different. Let me finish. One day we got orders from higher up to clear out a native village. Women, children, old people. Didn't matter. Orders were orders. Captain Morrison refused. Said he wouldn't commit murder just because some general 1,000 miles away told him to. He knew refusing would end his career and maybe get him court-martialed. But he did it anyway because having power didn't mean he had to use it the way everyone expected. Mara looked at him. What happened? He got demoted, reassigned to the worst posting the army could find. But as men, all of us, we knew we'd served under someone who chose right over easy, who had power but let his conscience guide it instead of his ego. Billy finished his coffee. Point is, Evan's got power over you now. That's true. But he spent weeks proving what kind of man he is when he thinks nobody's watching. You think that changes just because he knows he owns the ranch? It might. Power changes people. Then watch him. See if he changes. But don't throw away something real because you're afraid of something that hasn't happened yet. Billy struggled to his feet. I'm going to check on Marcus, make sure he's not bleeding through his bandages again. You should talk to Evan. Man's been sitting in that parlor looking like death itself, terrified you're going to leave. After Billy limped away, Mara sat with his words and her coffee and the cold Montana night. Around her, the ranch settled into exhausted sleep, men too tired to do anything but trust that tomorrow would come and they'd face it together. She thought about the man in the parlor, about how he'd looked that first morning in the cookhouse, careful and quiet, and so obviously carrying weight he wouldn't name, about how he'd fixed her door hinge without asking for acknowledgement, about how he'd faced down Billy's drunken aggression not with violence but with calm authority, about how he'd stood between Tommy and a charging bull without hesitation, about how he'd walked into the open and offered himself to Cole Rafferty to save everyone else. Every choice he'd made since arriving had been about making himself useful, making himself smaller, proving his worth through action instead of demanding recognition. Even knowing he owned the ranch wouldn't have changed those choices. If anything, it made them more meaningful. He could have arrived and announced his ownership, demanded deference and respect. Instead, he'd asked only for coffee and work. That said something about who Evan Hale was at his core. But Billy was right about something else too. She needed to see what Evan did now that the secret was out. Whether power revealed or created corruption. Whether ownership changed the man who'd kissed her like she was precious. She finished her coffee, stood on legs stiff from sitting in the cold, and walked back into the main house. The parlor was dark, except for a single lamp burning low. Evan lay on the makeshift bed where she'd left him, eyes closed, one hand pressed to his bandaged side. For a moment she thought he was asleep, but then he spoke without opening his eyes. "You came back. I never left the property. You know what I mean." He opened his eyes then, and even in the dim light she could see the fear there. "I thought you might ride out, decide I'm not worth the complication." She pulled up the chair Chester had used earlier and sat down. "I thought about it, about saddling a horse and just going, finding another ranch, another cookhouse, another invisible job where nobody expects anything from me. But you didn't. No, because running is what I did 3 years ago, and I'm tired of running. And because you deserve better than me disappearing without explanation just because things got complicated." She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "But I need to understand something, Evan. When Chester told you that you owned this place, when you found out you had the power to make decisions about everyone here, did any part of you feel different, more important, more entitled?" He was quiet for a long time, thinking. "Honestly, I felt sick. Felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. Because I came here looking for penance, looking to prove I could be a useful man instead of a destructive one. And finding out I owned the place meant I hadn't been earning anything. I'd just been playing in my own yard the whole time." "That's not true. You earned every bit of respect you got here." "Did I? Or did people respect me because on some level Chester's authority made them think they should? Because the foreman kept me around when he could have sent me packing and everyone noticed? You think that's why I fell in love with you? Because Chester didn't fire you? I don't know, maybe. I don't know anything anymore." He tried to sit up and winced, falling back. "All I know is that 3 weeks ago I was nobody, just a drifter trying to outrun ghosts. And now I'm suddenly the owner of a ranch, responsible for people's livelihoods, expected to make decisions that affect everyone's lives. I don't know how to be that person, Mara. I don't know if I want to be." She saw it then, the real fear underneath everything else. Not that power would corrupt him, but that he didn't feel worthy of having it, that ownership meant responsibility he didn't think he'd earned, authority he didn't trust himself to wield. "What do you want?" she asked softly. "If you could choose anything, what would you want your life to look like?" "I want to work with my hands." I want to fix things that are broken. I want to earn my keep instead of inheriting it. I want to wake up every morning and make coffee with you and sit by the window watching the sunrise and know that the day ahead matters because we're building something together." His voice roughened. "I want to be the man you fell in love with, not the man who happens to own the property. I want to be Evan Hale the ranch hand, not Evan Hale the landowner." Those aren't mutually exclusive, aren't they? How can I be both? How can I work alongside men as equals when I have the power to fire them? How can I be just another hand when everyone knows I'm the one who ultimately decides everything? Mara stood and moved to sit on the edge of his bed, careful not to jostle his injuries. She took his hand, feeling the calluses and scars, the physical evidence of hard work honestly done. "You're asking the wrong question. It's not about being a ranch hand or a landowner. It's about what kind of person you choose to be regardless of your position. Captain Morrison, the man Billy told me about, he had absolute power and chose to use it with conscience. You have ownership, but you can still choose to wield it with humility and fairness. What if I choose wrong? What if I make decisions that hurt people? Then you'll make different decisions next time. That's what being human means, making mistakes and learning from them." She squeezed his hand. "Evan, you spent 5 years running from who you used to be. Maybe it's time to stop running from who you're becoming." And who am I becoming? A good man, an honest man, someone who saves 17-year-old boys from bulls and elderly ranch hands from raiders, someone who faces his past instead of hiding from it, someone who builds instead of destroys. She leaned closer. Someone I love despite the complications. Maybe because of them. He reached up with his free hand and touched her face, gentle despite the tremor in his fingers. "I don't deserve you. We've had this conversation. Neither of us deserves the other. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is choosing each other anyway. Even knowing I own this place, even knowing the power imbalance exists, even knowing all of it, because I trust you. Not because you're perfect, you're not. Not because you'll never make mistakes, you will. But because I've watched you when you thought nobody was looking, and I've seen who you are when there's no benefit to being decent. That's the man I love. The rest is just details we figure out together." He pulled her down then, kissing her with a desperation that spoke of hours spent terrified he'd lost her. She kissed him back, careful of his injuries but fierce in her certainty. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to talk to Chester tomorrow. Figure out what the legal situation is, what options we have. Maybe I can sign over ownership to the ranch hands collectively, make it a cooperative. Or I can stay as owner but with Chester as managing partner. Or—" He stopped. "I'm doing it again, aren't I? Trying to run from the responsibility." "A little bit, yeah." "So what do I do?" "You heal, you recover, and then we figure it out together. You, me, Chester, everyone who has a stake in this place. You don't have to make decisions alone, Evan. That's what having people who care about you means." He closed his eyes, and she saw the tension drain from his shoulders, the first real relaxation since the truth came out. Together. I like the sound of that. Me too. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the lamplight, while the ranch slept around them, and the future stretched out uncertain but no longer terrifying. The next morning brought federal marshals. 2 of them rode in just after dawn, stern-faced men with badges and serious expressions. Mara was in the temporary cookhouse they'd set up in the main house kitchen, making breakfast for the ranch hands, when she heard the horses. Her stomach dropped, old instinct screaming that official visitors meant trouble. Evan was already up despite doctor's orders, dressed and moving carefully as he talked with Chester about repair priorities. He stiffened when he saw the marshals, and Mara recognized the look that crossed his face, the one that said he was preparing to run or fight, old habits dying hard. "Evan Hale?" the older marshal asked, dismounting. "That's me." "Marshal Thomas Garrett. This is Marshal James Chen. We need to talk to you about Cole Rafferty and the raid yesterday. Sheriff sent word to our office in Helena." Chester stepped forward, protective. "Evan's been cleared of all charges related to his past association with Rafferty's gang. You've got no cause to arrest him." "We're not here to arrest anyone," Marshal Chen said calmly. We're here to take statements and inform Mr. Hale that the federal prosecutor wants to commend him for his cooperation in the original case against Rafferty. His testimony led to multiple convictions, and his actions yesterday in defending this property resulted in the death of one of the territory's most wanted criminals. Evan blinked. Commend me? The prosecutor wants to make sure you understand that you're not in any legal jeopardy, that you're free to live your life without fear of prosecution. Garrett pulled out papers. He's also authorized us to deliver compensation for the risk you took in testifying. It's not much, $500, but it's the government's way of acknowledging your assistance. Mara watched Evan process this information, saw him struggling to reconcile it with years of thinking he was still marked as a criminal. $500 was a significant sum, enough to rebuild the barn, replace equipment, hire additional hands for the heavy repair work. There's something else, Marshal Chen added. Cole Rafferty had a bounty on his head, $5,000, dead or alive. Technically, that bounty belongs to whoever killed him. According to the statements we've taken so far, that would be you, Mr. Hale. The silence that followed was profound. $5,000. Enough money to completely rebuild High Ridge Ranch, to hire a full crew, to ensure everyone who'd been injured in the raid got proper medical care and compensation. I didn't kill him for money, Evan said finally. I killed him because he was trying to kill people I care about. Motive doesn't change the law. The bounty's yours if you want it. Evan looked at Chester, then at Mara, then back at the marshals. If I take it, I want it divided among the ranch hands who fought yesterday. Equal shares for everyone, with extra portions for the families of the men who died and the men who were seriously injured. They earned it more than I did. Marshal Garrett raised an eyebrow. That's generous. Most men would keep it. Most men didn't have 30 people willing to die to protect them. I'm not keeping money that their blood paid for. The marshals exchanged glances, and Mara saw respect in their expressions, recognition that Evan Hale was exactly who his testimony had suggested, someone trying genuinely to be better than his past. We'll need formal statements from everyone who witnessed the raid, Marshal Chen said, and we'll need to document the bodies for the territory's records. But as far as the federal government is concerned, Mr. Hale, you're a hero, not a criminal. You should know that. After they left to begin interviewing the ranch hands, Evan stood in the yard looking stunned. Chester clapped him on the shoulder, carefully, mindful of the injuries. You handled that well. Did I? I feel like I'm stumbling through everything. That's called being human. You'll get used to it. Chester's voice softened. Your father would be proud, you know, of the man you've become, of how you handled Cole Rafferty, of how you're taking care of his ranch and his people. I'm not sure I'm taking care of anything. I'm just trying not to make things worse. That's half of leadership right there, doing no harm. The other half is knowing when to trust the people around you to do their jobs. You're learning both. Chester paused. I need to talk to you about the ranch operations, about how we move forward from here. They spent the next hour going over details, the extent of the damage, the cost of repairs, what could be salvaged, and what needed replacing. The barn was a complete loss, which meant building a new one before winter set in hard. The bunkhouse could be repaired but would need significant work. 3 families needed compensation for their losses. Equipment had been destroyed, livestock had scattered, and would need rounding up. The list was overwhelming, but Chester had plans for all of it. He'd already sent riders to neighboring ranches asking to borrow equipment and hands. He'd gotten commitments from suppliers in town to extend credit for materials. He'd organized the work crews into shifts so repairs could happen around the clock. You've been running this place, Evan said slowly. Really running it, making all the decisions that matter. That's what a foreman does. Your father trusted me with it, and I've tried to honor that trust. So why do you need me? You clearly don't require an owner looking over your shoulder. Chester smiled. Because leadership isn't about doing everything yourself. It's about giving people permission to do what they're good at. I can manage daily operations and make tactical decisions, but strategic choices, whether to expand, whether to hire more permanent hands, whether to invest in new breeding stock, those need someone who will be here long term, someone with actual stake in the outcome. That's you, whether you're ready for it or not. And if I make the wrong choices, then we'll deal with the consequences together. That's what partners do. Chester held out his hand. Stay, Evan. Not as a drifter or a hired hand, but as the owner who gives a damn about the people working his land. Stay and learn and build something that lasts. Evan shook his hand, and in that moment Mara saw him accept not just the ownership, but the responsibility it carried. Saw him stop running from who he was becoming and start walking toward it deliberately. The marshals spent 2 days taking statements and documenting everything. They interviewed every ranch hand, examined every body, cataloged every piece of evidence. By the time they left, they'd compiled a report that cleared Evan of any wrongdoing and officially closed the federal case against Cole Rafferty's gang. The bounty money arrived a week later, delivered by armed escort. Evan divided it exactly as he'd promised, equal shares for everyone who'd fought, with double portions for Billy, Marcus, and Tommy, who'd been seriously injured, and triple portions for the families of the 3 men who'd died. He kept nothing for himself. That's your money, Mara protested when she found out. You earned it. No, we earned it. Every person who stood in that yard earned it. I just happened to be the one who fired the killing shot. He was sitting at the desk in what had been his father's office, a room he'd been slowly making his own, replacing old papers with new plans. Besides, the ranch is mine. I don't need bounty money when I've got land and cattle and a future worth building. You're really staying then, not just temporarily. I'm staying. This is home now, the first real home I've had since I was 17. He reached for her hand. That is, if you're staying too. She'd been thinking about that question for days, about what it meant to stay, to commit, to build a life in a place where violence had happened and might happen again, about whether she could truly be equal partners with someone who technically had power over her employment and housing. But she'd also been watching Evan over the past week, watching him defer to Chester's expertise, watching him ask the ranch hands for their input on repairs, watching him split firewood despite his healing injury, because the work needed doing and he refused to ask others to do what he wouldn't. Watching him prove again and again that ownership hadn't changed who he was at his core. I'm staying, she said, but not as just the cook. If I'm going to be here, I want to be more than invisible labor. What do you want to be? She'd been thinking about that too. I want to manage the cookhouse properly, hire help when we need it, maybe start a garden come spring, grow our own vegetables instead of buying everything from town. I want to teach Tommy to read. Did you know he can't read? And I want to help with the financial records because Chester's handwriting is terrible, and I'm good with numbers. Evan grinned, the first real, unguarded smile she'd seen since the raid. So you want to be indispensable. I want to be seen, to matter, to contribute in ways that use all of me, not just my ability to make biscuits. You already matter. You already contribute. But yes, to everything you just said. Talk to Chester about the budget for the cookhouse. Talk to Tommy about reading lessons. Talk to me about the financial records because you're right. Chester's handwriting is illegible. He pulled her closer. And talk to me about the future because I want to build it with you. All of it. She kissed him then, long and slow, and when they pulled apart, she saw the man she'd fallen for, complicated and wounded and trying desperately to be better than his past. But she also saw something new. Hope. The kind that comes from standing still instead of running, from facing hard truths instead of hiding, from choosing to build instead of destroy. We should probably discuss the scandal, she said after a moment. What scandal? The ranch owner carrying on with the cook. People will talk. Let them talk. I don't particularly care what people think as long as you're happy. I am happy. Terrified and uncertain about 100 things, but happy. She traced the line of his jaw, feeling stubble rough against her palm. Though we should probably make things official at some point. I'm not interested in being someone's secret. Neither am I, which is why. He pulled open a desk drawer and retrieved a small box. Inside was a ring, simple silver with a small blue stone, nothing fancy but clearly chosen with care. I bought this in town 3 days ago, was trying to figure out the right moment to ask, but I'm learning that there's no perfect moment, just moments you choose to make important. Mara stared at the ring, at this man who 3 weeks ago had been a stranger asking only for coffee. Evan, I know it's fast. I know we've got complications to work through. I know you might not be ready. He took the ring from the box, holding it but not yet offering it. But I also know that I love you, that I want to build a life with you, that I want to face whatever comes next knowing we're partners in every sense. So I'm asking, Mara Ellison, will you marry me? She thought about all the reasons to say no, about how quick it was, how complicated the power dynamics remained, how much they still didn't know about each other, about how she'd sworn she'd never put herself in a position where a man could control her life again. But she also thought about how Evan had proven himself in every moment that mattered, about how he saw her when she needed seeing, about how he chose her not despite her past, but with full knowledge of it, about how they'd both survived things that should have broken them, and somehow found each other in the aftermath. Yes, she said, with conditions. He blinked. Conditions? I keep my own money. I have equal say in decisions about the ranch. If we ever have children, they'll be raised to respect women as full equals, not property. And if you ever use your position as owner to intimidate or control me, I will leave immediately and take half of everything with me legally or otherwise. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Those are fair conditions. I accept all of them. Anything else? You have to promise to always tell me the truth, even when it's hard, even when you think hiding it will protect me. No more secrets. No more secrets, he agreed. I promise. He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, like he'd somehow known, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her chest ache. Outside, the ranch continued its noisy work of rebuilding. Inside, two people who'd been running from different hells made promises to each other, choosing to stand still and build something that might actually last. The news of their engagement spread through the ranch faster than wildfire, and the reactions told Mara everything she needed to know about how the men truly saw both of them. Billy let out a whoop that could be heard across 3 pastures and immediately started planning a celebration despite his still healing leg. Marcus, always quieter, simply shook Evan's hand and told Mara she'd gotten herself a good man. Tommy burst into tears, the happy kind, and stammered something about how they were like the parents he'd never had, which made Mara cry too. But it was Chester's reaction that mattered most. He found them that evening in the temporary cookhouse where Mara was preparing dinner, and Evan was supposedly resting but actually helping peel potatoes. I heard the news, Chester said, and his weathered face split into a genuine smile. About damn time, if you ask me. I was wondering how long you two would dance around what was obvious to everyone else. You knew? Mara asked. I've got eyes. Seen the way you look at each other since the first week. Seen the way he finds excuses to stay late helping you clean up. Seen the way you time the coffee to be ready, right when he shows up. Chester pulled up a chair. Your father would approve, Evan. He always said the best marriages were built on respect and shared work. You've got both. Evan set down the potato he'd been mangling. He was terrible at peeling and met Chester's eyes. I want to do this right. The engagement, the marriage, everything. I want there to be no question that Mara's my equal partner in all of this. Then make it legal and clear. Draw up papers with the lawyer in town. Put it in writing that she's got equal ownership of the ranch, equal say in decisions. Make it so that even if something happens to you, she's protected. Chester's voice was practical but warm. That's how you show respect isn't just words. You make it binding. I can do that. We'll ride to town next week, get everything documented properly. Good. Now, about the wedding itself. You planning something simple, or you want the whole territory invited? Mara and Evan exchanged glances. Neither of them had thought that far ahead, too caught up in the immediate aftermath of the raid, and the revelation of ownership and the 1,000 small crises that came with rebuilding. Simple, Mara said. Just the ranch hands and maybe a few folks from town. Nothing fancy. The Henderson family should be invited, Evan added. They helped during the raid, and Doc Morrison, and the sheriff who coordinated with the marshals. So about 50 people then, Chester said with amusement. That's Montana's simple, which means a decent-sized gathering. We can hold it here once the new barn's finished, give people something to celebrate after all the darkness. Late October maybe, after the harvest work's done, but before the hard snows hit. 6 weeks. The timeline felt simultaneously too fast and exactly right. 6 weeks to finish the major repairs, to settle into the new normal, to prepare for a wedding that would mark not just their union, but the ranch's rebirth from violence. Late October works, Evan agreed. Gives us time to do it properly. That night, lying in bed in what had become their shared room, scandal be damned, as Mara had said, they talked about the future in concrete terms for the first time. What they wanted the ranch to be, how they wanted to live, what kind of legacy they hoped to build. I want this place to be known for treating people fairly, Evan said into the darkness, where the hands get paid decent wages and have safe places to sleep and actual days off, where men like Tommy can learn skills that'll serve them their whole lives, where nobody has to feel invisible or disposable. That costs money, Mara pointed out, though she loved the vision he was describing. We'll make it work. Good people work harder when they're treated well. Lower turnover means better productivity. It's an investment in the ranch's future. He rolled onto his side to face her. What do you want? I want the cookhouse to be more than just a place to eat. I want it to be where people gather, where news gets shared, where community happens. And I want to start that garden I mentioned, big enough that we can preserve food for winter, maybe even sell surplus to other ranches. Make us more self-sufficient. I like that. What else? She was quiet for a moment, gathering courage. I want children. Eventually. When we're ready. But I want them to grow up seeing both of us work, seeing partnership instead of one person commanding and the other obeying. I want them to know their mother is as important as their father. His hand found hers in the darkness. They will. I promise they will. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of hard work and small joys. The new barn rose from the ashes of the old one, bigger and better designed with input from every hand who'd be working in it. Billy, still recovering, drew up plans based on his carpentry knowledge. Marcus supervised the actual construction. Tommy fetched and carried supplies. His broken leg healed enough for light work. Even the neighboring ranchers sent men to help. The frontier code of mutual aid in full effect. Mara hired 2 women from town to help in the cookhouse. Sarah, a widow with 3 children who needed work, and her sister Beth, who'd been working as a seamstress but preferred cooking. With help, Mara could actually take breaks, could work on the garden plot she'd staked out, could spend evenings with Evan instead of collapsing exhausted into bed. The garden became her sanctuary. She worked the soil, planned the layout, and started ordering seeds for spring planting. Evan helped when his healing ribs allowed, and they spent hours talking about which vegetables grew best in Montana's short summers, how to extend the growing season, whether they could build a greenhouse for starting seedlings early. You're really thinking long-term, he observed one evening as she sketched out a multi-year crop rotation plan. That's what staying means. Planning for years instead of weeks. Building instead of just surviving. She looked up at him. That scare you? Terrifies me. In the best way possible. True to his word, Evan took her to town the following week to meet with the lawyer. They drew up papers that made Mara a full legal partner in High Ridge Ranch, with equal ownership and equal authority in all decisions. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Walsh, made sure every detail was ironclad. I don't see many men willing to give up sole control of their property, Walsh observed, studying Evan with open curiosity. It's not giving up control. It's sharing it with someone who's earned it. Evan signed the papers without hesitation. Besides, Mara's smarter than me about most things. I'd be a fool not to make her an equal partner legally as well as practically. Walsh smiled. Your father would have liked her. William Hale respected competence above all else. He'd approve of you choosing a woman with spine and sense. You knew my father? Drew up his will. He talked about you sometimes, wondered where you'd gone, hoped you'd come home eventually. He never stopped hoping. Walsh's expression softened. He'd be glad you made it back, even if it took longer than he lived to see. The words hit Evan hard. Mara saw him struggle with them, with regret for lost time, with grief for a relationship that couldn't be repaired, with the complicated mess of feelings that came from knowing his father had never truly given up on him. Thank you for telling me that, he managed finally. They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, hands clasped between them, the legal papers safely stored in Evan's saddlebag. Equal partners, now in every sense that mattered. The power imbalance that had terrified Mara was neutralized. She owned half of everything, could make decisions without his permission, could leave if she chose and take her share with her, but she wasn't going to leave. That was the thing she'd finally accepted, This was home now, built not on fear or necessity, but on choice. As October arrived, the ranch transformed. The new barn stood proud and solid, its fresh lumber bright against the weathered buildings around it. The bunkhouse repairs were complete, better insulated than before. The cookhouse had been rebuilt slightly larger, with proper storage and a new stove that didn't smoke. Equipment had been replaced, livestock rounded up and counted, systems refined based on lessons learned from the raid. But more than the physical changes, something had shifted in the atmosphere. The men worked with renewed purpose, knowing they were part of something that valued them. Laughter came easier. The evening meals in the cookhouse became social events where stories were shared and plans were made. Tommy had started his reading lessons with Mara, making slow but steady progress. Billy had been promoted to assistant foreman, his tactical mind and leadership during the raid earning him Chester's trust. Marcus was training 2 younger hands in the finer points of horse handling. High Ridge Ranch was becoming what Evan had envisioned, a place where people weren't invisible, where work was respected, where community mattered. 2 weeks before the wedding, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Mara's first instinct was fear, old trauma from the raid making her reach for the rifle she now kept close. But this rider came alone, in daylight, with hands visible and pace unhurried. Evan met him in the yard, and Mara watched from the cookhouse window, ready to intervene if needed. She saw them talk, saw Evan's posture shift from defensive to surprised to something else entirely. After 20 minutes, Evan brought the stranger to the cookhouse. "Mara, this is Joseph Reeves. He's Tommy's uncle." The man was maybe 40, weathered and thin, dressed in travel-worn clothes. He had Tommy's eyes, same shade of hazel, same shape. "Ma'am, I've been looking for Tommy for 6 months. His mother, my sister, died last spring, and the boy ran off before I could reach him. Heard he might be working at this ranch." "He is. He's out helping with the fence line repairs." Mara studied Joseph Reeves carefully. "Why should we tell you where he is? For all we know, you're the reason he ran." "That's fair. The truth is my sister married badly. Man who beat her and the boy both. After she died, Tommy was supposed to come live with me and my wife, but he thought I was like his father, thought all men were. So he ran." Joseph's voice was steady but sad. "I've been trying to find him to tell him he's got a home, a real one, with people who'll treat him right." Evan and Mara exchanged glances. Tommy had never spoken about his family, had arrived at the ranch with nothing but the clothes on his back and desperation in his eyes. They'd assumed he was an orphan with nowhere else to go. "He's a good kid," Evan said carefully. "Works hard, learning to read, saved my life during the raid." "He saved your life?" "Long story. Point is, he's family here. We're not letting him go anywhere he doesn't want to go." Joseph nodded slowly. "I wouldn't want him to. I just want him to know he's got options, that he's not alone in the world. If he wants to stay here, that's his choice. But I'd like the chance to tell him I'm not his father, that he's got blood family who wants him safe and happy." They found Tommy by the north pasture, mending fence with Marcus. The moment he saw Joseph, he went rigid with fear, dropping the wire cutters and backing away. "Easy," Marcus said quietly, moving between them. "Tommy, it's all right," Mara called out. "He's not here to hurt you." But Tommy was shaking his head, eyes wild. "I'm not going back. You can't make me go back." Joseph stopped walking, kept his distance. "I'm not here to make you do anything. Your ma asked me to look after you before she passed. I've been searching because I promised her I'd find you, make sure you were safe." "She's dead?" 6 months now. The fever took her quick. She didn't suffer much at the end." Joseph's voice gentled. "She talked about you, said you were the best thing she ever did, and she was sorry she couldn't protect you better from your father." Tommy's face crumpled. He'd been holding himself together for so long, working so hard to prove his worth, and the news of his mother's death shattered that control. Mara reached him before he hit the ground, wrapping her arms around him while he sobbed. "He used to hit her," Tommy gasped between sobs. "Used to hit me. I tried to stop him, but I was too small, too weak." "You were a child," Mara said firmly. "None of that was your fault. None of it." Joseph approached slowly, carefully, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "I'm not him, Tommy. Never have been, never will be. My wife Kate, Your aunt, she's been worried sick about you. We've got a small farm in Wyoming, nothing fancy, but it's peaceful. No violence, no fear, just work and family and trying to make a decent life. Why would you want me? I'm nobody. You're my nephew. You're Sarah's boy. That makes you somebody to us. Joseph knelt down to Tommy's level. But if you found a home here, if these people treat you right, then stay. I just needed to know you were safe. Needed to tell you that you've got choices. Tommy looked at Evan, then at Mara, then at Marcus, who'd been teaching him patience with horses, then at Billy, who'd been showing him how to shoot straight. He looked at the ranch that had become his sanctuary, and then back at his uncle. Can I think about it? Can I have time to decide? Take all the time you need. I'm staying in town for the week. If you want to talk, come find me. If you decide to stay here, I'll head home knowing you're in good hands. Joseph stood, nodded to Evan and Mara. Thank you for taking care of him. Whatever he decides, thank you for that. After Joseph left, Tommy sat between Mara and Evan on the cookhouse steps, watching the sun set over the ranch. He was quiet for a long time, processing. I like it here, he said finally. I feel safe here, but I also... He trailed off, struggling. You also want family, Mara finished gently. Want to know your mother's people. Want to understand where you came from. Yeah, is that bad? Like I'm betraying you all? No, Evan said. It's human, and it's smart. You should meet them, spend time with them, see if they're people you want in your life. If they're not, you've always got a place here. If they are, he paused, then you've got family in two places. That's not a bad thing. But the wedding's in 2 weeks. I wanted to be here for that. Mara hugged him close. Then stay for the wedding. Meet your uncle properly. See if maybe he and his wife want to attend. If you're comfortable with that. Then afterward, maybe go visit their farm. See what kind of life they've got. You can always come back here for summer work. We're not going anywhere. You promise? You promise I can come back? Promise, Evan said. This is your home as long as you want it to be. Tommy did stay for the wedding, and he did invite Joseph and Kate Reeves to attend. The couple arrived 2 days early, and Mara watched carefully as Tommy interacted with them. She saw him gradually relax around Joseph, saw Kate's patient kindness win him over, saw the possibility of healing beginning to take root. The wedding day arrived with perfect October weather, cool and clear, the aspen trees golden against the blue sky. Someone had hung lanterns in the new barn, transforming it from a workspace into something almost magical. Sarah and Beth had worked with women from neighboring ranches to prepare food enough for an army. Marcus had organized the ranch hands to set up tables and chairs. Billy, despite his still healing leg, had somehow procured a fiddle player and a guitar player from town. Mara wore a dress that Beth had helped her make, simple but beautiful, deep green that brought out her eyes. She'd never imagined getting married again, had thought that chapter of her life closed forever after she'd fled her first husband. But this was different. This was choosing instead of being chosen. This was partnership instead of ownership. Evan wore new clothes that actually fit him properly. His hair cut neat, his face clean-shaven. He looked nervous and happy and slightly overwhelmed as he stood at the front of the barn with Chester beside him as best man. The ceremony itself was brief. Neither of them wanted long speeches or elaborate ritual. Catherine Walsh, who'd been ordained as a justice of the peace, kept it simple and meaningful. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising honesty and partnership and the courage to face hard things together. They exchanged rings, matching silver bands engraved with small mountains, symbolizing the landscape that had brought them together. When Walsh pronounced them married, Evan kissed Mara like she was air and he'd been underwater. The barn erupted in cheers and applause, and then the celebration began in earnest. There was food and music and dancing. Billy somehow managed to dance on his bad leg, spinning Sarah around until she laughed so hard she couldn't breathe. Marcus taught the guitar player a new song. Tommy played cards with the younger ranch hands, looking more relaxed than Mara had ever seen him. Joseph and Kate sat with Chester, discussing farming and ranching and the challenges of making a life in hard country. As the evening wore on and the lantern light grew golden, Evan pulled Mara outside for a moment of relative quiet. They stood together in the yard where Cole Rafferty had died, where violence had threatened to destroy everything, where they'd chosen to stand together instead of running. "You happy?" he asked, arms around her waist. "Ridiculously happy, probably more than I deserve. We've had this conversation. Neither of us deserves anything. We just get to be grateful for what we've got." He kissed her forehead. "Thank you for staying, for choosing this life when you could have chosen safety somewhere else." "Safety's overrated. I'd rather have this, complicated and messy and real, than safe and invisible." She looked up at him. "We're going to make mistakes, you know. We're going to have fights and disagreements and moments where we wonder what the hell we were thinking." "Probably, but we'll figure it out, together." "Together," she agreed, and the word felt like a promise more binding than any legal document. They went back inside to their celebration, to their community, to the life they were building, one choice at a time. The music played late into the night, and when guests finally started leaving, each one stopped to offer congratulations and genuine happiness. These people had watched Mara and Evan find each other, had fought beside them, had believed in them when belief required courage. Tommy approached as the party was winding down, his young face serious. "I'm going to go with Uncle Joseph for a while. Visit the farm, see what it's like. But I want to come back next summer, if that's okay?" "More than okay," Mara said. "Your family, Tommy. That doesn't change based on geography." "Besides, someone needs to keep up with your reading lessons," Evan added. "Can't have you regressing over the winter." Tommy hugged them both fiercely. "Thank you. For everything. For saving me. For teaching me. For—" his voice cracked. "For making me feel like I mattered." "You do matter," Mara said firmly. "Don't ever forget that." They watched Tommy leave with Joseph and Kate the next morning, saw him look back 3 times before the wagon rounded the bend. It hurt to see him go, but it was the right kind of hurt, the kind that came from loving someone enough to want what was best for them instead of what was easiest. The weeks after the wedding settled into a new rhythm. Mara and Evan worked side by side, making decisions together, learning the give and take of partnership. Some decisions were easy: where to position the new chicken coop, which bulls to keep for breeding, whether to order supplies from the merchant in Helena or the one in Butte. Some were harder, requiring compromise and patience, and the willingness to admit when you were wrong. They had their first real fight 3 weeks after the wedding, over whether to hire an additional hand for winter or tough it out with the current crew. Evan wanted to hire, worried about overworking the men. Mara argued they couldn't afford it until they saw what the winter expenses actually looked like. The argument escalated until they were both yelling, neither willing to back down. Finally, Evan stormed out, and Mara sat in the office fuming. She almost let him go, almost let pride win. But then she remembered her promise, to face hard things together, to not let hurt fester into something worse. She found him in the new barn, brushing down horses with more force than necessary. "I'm sorry I yelled." I'm sorry too. Shouldn't have pushed so hard." "You were trying to take care of people. That's not wrong." She leaned against the stall door. "But I was trying to take care of our future, make sure we don't end up financially strapped. That's not wrong either." "So what do? We compromise. We talk to Chester, get his opinion on what the winter workload actually requires. We look at the books together, really look, not just glance, and we agree that if we can't reach consensus, we table the decision for a week and revisit it with clearer heads." He set down the brush and pulled her into his arms. "I hate fighting with you." "Me too, but I'd rather fight with you than agree with you when I think you're wrong. That's what partnership means, being honest even when it's uncomfortable." They hired half a hand, a ranch kid from town who could come out 3 days a week through winter, giving the crew some relief without breaking the budget. It wasn't either of their original plans, but it worked. And more importantly, they'd navigated their first real conflict without letting it break them. Winter came hard that year, snow piling up until the ranch felt like an island in a white sea. But they were prepared, food stored, livestock secured, firewood stacked high. The cookhouse became the heart of ranch life, men gathering there not just for meals but for warmth and companionship during the long, dark evenings. Mara taught reading lessons to anyone who wanted them. Turned out 3 of the ranch hands had never learned properly and were grateful for the chance. Evan worked on equipment maintenance, making sure everything would be ready for spring. Chester planned the upcoming year's operations with input from everyone. Billy carved wooden toys in the evenings, his hands needing something to do while his leg finished healing. One particularly brutal evening in January, when the wind howled so hard the walls shook and the temperature dropped to 20 below. Everyone ended up in the cookhouse because it was the warmest building. Sarah made hot cider with spices, Beth told stories about growing up in Ohio before heading west, and someone started singing old songs that everyone knew the words to. Mara sat beside Evan, watching their community keep the darkness at bay with nothing but presence and shared warmth, and felt something settle deep in her chest. This was what she'd been running toward without knowing it. This belonging, this mattering, this being seen and valued not despite her scars, but including them. "What are you thinking?" Evan asked quietly. "That I was dead for 3 years and didn't know it. That I was just going through motions, waiting for permission to be alive again." She leaned into him. "And that somehow you gave me that permission. By seeing me. By treating me like I was worth something. You are worth something. You always were. I know that now. Took me a while, but I know it." Spring came eventually, as it always did, the snow melting into rushing streams and muddy fields. The garden plot that Mara had prepared the previous fall was ready for planting, and she spent long days working the soil and setting seeds. Evan helped when he could, though he admitted freely that he had no talent for growing things. "That's why we're partners," she pointed out. "You're good at things I'm terrible at. I'm good at things you're terrible at. Together, we're almost competent." Almost? Let's not get cocky. Tommy returned in May, taller and more confident than when he'd left. His winter with Joseph and Kate had been good for him. He'd gained weight, learned farming skills, and most importantly had gotten to know family who treated him with kindness. But he'd missed the ranch, missed the people who'd saved him, missed being part of something larger than himself. "Uncle Joseph says I can come back every summer," he told them excitedly. "Help with the heavy work here, then go back for school in fall. Kate's teaching me more advanced reading, and Uncle Joseph's teaching me numbers and bookkeeping." "So you're going to be educated and useful," Evan said with a smile. "Dangerous combination. I want to have my own ranch someday, like this one, where people are treated fair." Tommy looked around at High Ridge with obvious affection. "Want to build something that matters." "Then you're learning from the right people," Mara said. "This place matters because everyone here makes it matter, including you." The spring roundup was successful, the cattle healthy after the hard winter. They'd lost fewer animals than expected, and the calving season brought strong stock that would fetch good prices come fall. Chester declared it the best spring operations he'd overseen in 5 years, and credited the crew's dedication for making it happen. In June, a letter arrived from Marshall Garrett. The last of Cole Rafferty's gang had been captured and brought to justice. The federal prosecutor wanted Evan to know that the case was finally, truly closed. There were no outstanding warrants, no revenge-seeking outlaws, no shadows left to fear. The past was done. Evan read the letter twice, then a third time, as if the words might change meaning. When he finally looked up, Mara saw tears tracking down his face. "It's over," he said. "Actually over." "How does that feel?" "Like I can breathe for the first time in 5 years. Like I'm actually allowed to be happy, instead of just waiting for the next disaster." He pulled her close. "Like I get to have a future, instead of just surviving the present." That summer was one of hard work and genuine joy. Mara's garden produced more than she'd hoped. Vegetables that supplemented the cookhouse meals and could be preserved for winter. She and Beth started experimenting with canning techniques, preserving enough food to significantly reduce their supply costs. Sarah's children became regular fixtures around the ranch, and watching Evan teach the youngest one to ride made Mara think seriously about children of their own. "You'd be a good father," she told him one evening. "You think so?" "I know so. You're patient and kind, and you actually listen when people talk. That's more than most fathers manage." She paused. "Would you want children? We've never really discussed it beyond my initial conditions." "I'd want them. With you. When you're ready," he smiled. "Though, fair warning, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'd be learning as I go." "That's called being a parent. Nobody knows what they're doing. We'd figure it out together." "Together. I like that word more every time you say it." By the time fall arrived, High Ridge Ranch had transformed into something beyond just Evan's vision. It had become a collective effort, shaped by everyone who worked there. The ranch hands had input into decisions. Profits were shared fairly. New equipment was purchased with consultation from the people who'd actually use it. The bunkhouse had a small library now, books donated and shared. The cookhouse hosted weekend gatherings where families from neighboring ranches came to socialize and share news. One October evening, exactly 1 year after the raid, Chester called a meeting in the barn. Every ranch hand was there, plus Sarah and Beth, plus several of the neighbors who'd become friends rather than just associates. This year's been the most successful in High Ridge's history, Chester announced. Not just financially, though the books are stronger than they've been in a decade, but in every way that matters. People staying instead of drifting, community building instead of just work getting done. This place becoming somewhere people want to be instead of just somewhere they end up. He gestured to Evan and Mara. That's because of them. Because they chose to build something different, something better. And because all of you chose to be part of it. Chester pulled out papers from his coat. So here's what we're doing. Starting this year, every hand who's been here 2 full seasons gets a small ownership stake in the ranch. Not enough to change operations, but enough that you're not just employees, you're partners. Your voices matter. Your futures are tied to this place in a real way. The silence that followed was profound. Ranch hands didn't get ownership stakes. They worked for wages and were grateful for steady employment. This was unprecedented. You don't have to accept, Evan said into the quiet. But we want you to know that your work matters, that you've helped build this place into what it is. That seems worth recognizing legally, not just with words. Billy was the first to speak, his voice gruff with emotion. That's more than fair. That's generous. It's smart business, Mara corrected. People who have stake in success work harder for that success, and it's the right thing to do. You've bled for this ranch. You should share in its prosperity. One by one, the hands who qualified accepted the offer. Not all of them. A few preferred the freedom of being able to leave without complication, but most. And in that acceptance, High Ridge became something rare in ranching country. A true collective, where labor and ownership weren't completely separated, where the people doing the work had actual say in how it was done. That night, after everyone had left and the ranch was quiet, Mara and Evan stood on the porch of the main house, their house now, full of both their belongings and their shared life. The stars were brilliant overhead, the kind of infinite sky that made a person feel both small and part of something vast. Your father would be proud, Mara said softly, of what you've built here, of who you've become. I hope so. I like to think he'd approve of the changes, of making this place more than just profitable, making it good. Evan wrapped his arms around her from behind. Though I couldn't have done any of it without you. Yes, you could have. But I'm glad you didn't have to. They stood together in the darkness, watching the ranch sleep, thinking about the year that had passed, the violence that had nearly destroyed everything, the revelations that had complicated everything, the choices they'd made to stay, to fight, to build instead of run. Do you ever regret it? Evan asked. Staying here, marrying me, taking on all of this? Every single day, she said. And when he stiffened, she smiled. I regret that I didn't find you sooner, that I wasted 3 years being invisible when I could have been living. That's my only regret. Not the staying, not the marrying, not the building, just the lost time before. We've got time now, years of it if we're lucky. Then let's not waste it. They went inside to their home, to their life, to the future they were building one day at a time. Behind them, High Ridge Ranch settled into night, a place where broken people had found healing, where violence had given way to community, where 2 people running from their pasts had discovered they could stop running and start living. The cookhouse would wake early tomorrow. 30 people, maybe more now, with the spring hiring coming, would need feeding. The work would be hard and the days long and the Montana weather unforgiving. There would be challenges and setbacks and moments of doubt, but there would also be coffee shared at dawn, and doors that stayed fixed and people who mattered to each other. There would be partnership and honesty and the kind of love that came from choosing each other every day, not just once. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.